Starting the stream. Looks healthy. All right. I'm Cougar. Welcome to my channel. We talk about global heating and stuff. Today is going to be stuff. Before you leave, if you do leave, you might want to leave a like, maybe subscribe to the channel. There's other stuff here besides today's topic, and there'll be more stuff later because it seems these days I do this every day. So what shall we talk about? I titled this as a reference to World War III, and there's a reason for doing that. Lately things are heating up in the Middle East. People, why do people look to the Middle East as the next spark that will cause the next World War, which we are designating 3. You could have designated the Cold War as World War III. Now, there would have been some legitimacy doing that, but what does it have to be a world war? I think that's important to mention. What does it take to be a world war? Let me come back to that. So, current events. There's hard words and even harder munitions being exchanged between Israel and some of the proxy states around it that are trying to destroy Israel, and their backer Iran. So Iran launched a bunch of missiles into Israel, and then people are probably aware of that, if that's going on. And because of how people look at things, they consider this as evidence that we're heading into World War III. That now Israel will do something. They'll bomb the Iranian nuclear production facilities, or they'll bomb the oil fields, and then Iran will bomb the Saudi oil fields, or something else, Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan, then the Russians will get involved, and the Chinese don't want the Iranian oil fields destroyed, so the Chinese will get involved, and so on and so forth. So that's how you get a world war, a kinetic, as we say, world war. Now I'm not a geopolitical analyst. You can go to Peter Zion if you want that kind of talk. I'm a scientist and engineer, and I'm only really worried about a global heating. If the problems in Israel and Iran get settled, they won't. But if they do, but even if they don't, this is not your biggest threat. Even if you're worried about World War III, even if you're worried about civilian deaths and escalations of the wars now taking place in the Middle East and bringing in the superpowers and blah blah blah, that's still not your worst threat, because that could actually be avoided. Let's face it, World War III is in our wheelhouse. We're not having World War III because of an alien invasion. We're not having World War III because of some volcanic eruption or something that is completely out of our control. Now, it is possible that some natural disaster could cause a global war, but I would think it would be more like something that really impacts populations, like a very, very large scale, highly lethal pandemic. COVID was bad enough, but COVID was really small potatoes compared to something like the Black Death or the influenza of 1918. So we know that we can have worse catastrophes of a natural kind, not truly natural disasters. But there's a man-made disaster that's going to eclipse all of that. It's going to eclipse the war in the Middle East. It's going to eclipse the superpowers getting involved. It's going to eclipse a war in Europe that the Russians are now waging. It's going to eclipse COVID, the Black Death, and the 1918 pandemic. There is a worse disaster that we have actually started. There's going to eclipse all of those, all of them combined, including the First and Second World Wars. All of that, everything that's happened in the entirety of modernity will be eclipsed by what's coming, and that's global heating. And you kind of knew I was going to say that, right? Global heating is going to destroy. I don't see a way to avoid this. The numbers, the math is pretty simple, actually. I've done other videos on here where I discuss the math. I'm not going to discuss it here. Global heating is going to destroy 99% of humanity. nuclear weapons aren't even thought to be capable of doing that. I've seen estimations, and Hollywood looks at it differently, but Hollywood also invented zombie apocalypses, so you can't really put much stock in what they're talking about. I've seen estimates in more recent times that a full-scale nuclear war between, just say, Russia and the U.S. alone, where most of the nuclear weapons do reside, would kill maybe 20% of humans on Earth, which is still a huge number, right? That's going to be like 2 billion people. So that's a lot of people. And, the U.S. is a pretty populous country, but even if you killed half of the U.S., that's only maybe 150 million people. It's really hard to get to large numbers. Russia isn't even half or even maybe a third of the population of the U.S. So you'd almost have to get India and China involved somehow. And why would Russia launch nuclear weapons against India and China? And why would the U.S. launch nuclear weapons against India and China? China doesn't have that many. We could almost ignore them. They could launch all their nuclear weapons that they have on missiles, and we could almost ignore them compared to what the Russians would be doing. So it's just not a nuclear war. It's just not the end of the world. It would still be a world war, but it's not going to come anywhere close to what global heating is going to do. Global heating involves the whole globe. The people in India might escape a nuclear exchange. They might be just fine. They might emerge as the sole remaining superpower after a nuclear exchange eliminates China, Russia, and America, and maybe parts of Europe, and something like that. India might actually emerge as the sole remaining superpower. But global heating is going to absolutely annihilate them. It's already given a run at doing that. There's a bunch of noise out here. I hope you're not hearing it on the microphone. If you are, it's not me. Yeah, it's pretty loud. But anyway, I can't do anything about it. So you're going to have World War III either way. Either because, the superpowers use this series of incidents in the Middle East to go at each other, which is, that's a possibility. Let's not rule it out. World War III would probably start something like that. Or we don't do that, but we continue to burn fossil fuels and buy and sell and move things around and have our economy growing and have our GDP growing and doing all the growing, and it's all done with fossil fuels, and then we just ruin the planet. And the reason why I say that ruining the planet leads to World War III is that almost certainly is what will happen. We're already seeing this happening all around the world as global heating begins to have its impacts on nations. They are becoming more desperate for food and energy. Their people are becoming more desperate for leadership. And what you get in those situations is you get what's called demagoguery. You get people who could lead and who would have policies and these kinds of things. They don't promise immediate fixes. They promise, a long-term strategy. They promise this is what we're going to do to protect ourselves from impacts. But a demagogue like Mussolini or Hitler or Donald Trump will just say whatever you want to hear. They'll just say impossible things. We'll control the weather. We'll cool the planet. They'll just say all kinds of crazy things. It's just, if you're a scientist, you're like, that's not going to happen. But the hoi polloi who are frightened and nervous and confused, and they don't understand any of this stuff because it's all science. And so the demagogues just stand up there and just spout bizarre bullshit. And the people are like, well, that sounds good to me. I guess we should elect this person. But the problem is that none of the things they're going to promise you are going to happen. None of the things they can promise you are going to happen because it's all impossible. It's an appeal to magic is what it is. You can't cool the planet. You just can't. The planet's too big. The heat problem is already too extreme. Even if you prevented the planet from heating any more than it already is, you're still fucked because there's enough heat in the system now to cause all the problems I could possibly name. Food insecurity, border clashes, rise of demagoguery, energy crises, collapse of treaties between nations. That's already happening in Europe. And eventually closing the borders, turning away refugees, dealing with a global humanitarian crisis, and then eventually probably global war. So And that's just what we have right now. Just the amount of harm we have caused to the planet right now, today, is enough to bring all those things. Because we already see those things happening around the world. Right-wing governments and political parties are rising all over Europe. Europe, which fought back fascism and lost, hundreds of millions of people in the process. Well, not hundreds of millions. Hundreds of millions were lost in the world. But Europe lost a lot of people in the First and the Second World Wars. And lots of destruction to their infrastructure, destruction to culture, and everything else. And you'd think they'd be done with fascism, but you'd be wrong. Right-wing and fascist political parties are now on the rise. And this is largely caused by climate change and global heating. And you'll say, you can't know that. Absolutely, I can know that. Because it's absolutely true. Do I need to explain it? All right, I'll take a moment to explain it. Because that is what this topic is. This topic is about how you get World War III regardless. A lot of these political parties that are rising, including the MAGA movement in America, including the Brexit movement in the UK, and now all the subsequent right-wing parties that are on the rise in places like Italy and I think Sweden, Germany, the UK. The reason all that happened was because some years ago, it's getting on maybe 5 years now, I should probably look it up, but I don't care. About 5-6 years ago, there was a huge influx of refugees, Muslims and Africans, into Europe via portals such as Greece, Turkey, Italy, south of France, Spain, and they just got on rickety, crappy boats, hundreds of people at a time, and tried to cross the Mediterranean. And they were doing this mostly for economic reasons. And it wasn't because they just suddenly decided they needed more money. These are very dangerous and expensive passages. These were not poor people doing this. These were people with money. They paid to get on these boats, to be 300 people to a boat or 60 people to a raft. They paid to do that. They paid a lot of money to do that because they were trying to get out of their own regions and countries because of economic collapse. And why was the economy collapsing? And why was there a food shortage? And why was there militancy? And why was there a rise of radical Islam and everything else in these countries that these people fled? Because they had generally a food crisis or internal refugee crises, which were driven by food crises. And why was that? Because of global heating and climate change in these countries, in these regions. All of these refugee movements were traced, that they all happened at the same time. I wonder why. They all happened at the same time, pretty much because at the same time, there was a massive change in how food could be produced and distributed. And that caused huge, huge problems. Most of it began in Syria. It then spread to other places. In Syria, the farmers were so badly impacted by a drought in Syria, which is going on to this day, of course, it's never going to change, that they went into the cities, and the Syrian government doesn't give a fuck. Told them, oh, you can't stay here. Why don't you go to Europe? That sounds like a good idea. So they sent them to Europe. And why would they do that? Well, because the Syrians are a client state of the Russians, and the Russians have been trying to destabilize Europe for a long time. And they still are to this day. So they said, why don't you all go to Europe? And so they did. And that started the stampede. Everyone started thinking, well, if that's the solution, is to go to Europe, then we'll all go to Europe. And when that started happening, then there was all these angry young militant, people who got thrown out of their own countries, essentially showing up in European capitals, and they were causing riots and killings and assaults and all this kind of stuff. And it got on the internet, and people started seeing it. And then pretty soon, the UK, they were being, even though they're an island nation far from the Middle East and Africa, they were being required to take their share of the refugees. I mean, Italy was taking them, Germany was taking them, the Netherlands, right, Denmark, Scandinavian countries were all taking these people in. And the UK said, we don't want those people. We're an island nation. We shouldn't have to have these people. Well, yeah, but you're part of the European Union, so it doesn't matter that you're an island nation. They can't get to you except, through Europe. And the British basically said, well, then we won't be part of the EU. And that's where Brexit came from. Brexit came from the immigrant crisis that was going on at the time and goes on still in Europe, principally in places like France. And France is the other end of the Channel Tunnel. And the Channel Tunnel is an easy way to get into the UK. There were no controls on the Channel Tunnel. So your island nation status didn't do you much good. There was a, that's a phone call. Probably, no, it's not my wife. I'm not going to answer it. And so a lot of these movements that are happening in Europe right now are a response to this immigration crisis, which was the response to global climate change that affected these regions where these people are now streaming out of. And it's a real humanitarian crisis in all these places. There's regional and local wars happening in Central and North and Central Africa, at least, that are killing thousands of people a day. And a big part of what's happening in at the borders of the NATO countries, immigrants that Belarus and Russia are trying to force into Europe through through border crossings. Those immigrants are coming from parts of the world that are being impacted by economic collapse caused by climate change. So the ongoing attempt to destabilize Europe and the ongoing attempt in the UK to isolate themselves from Europe and the rise of all the right-wing demagogic parties in Europe is a big part of this. So this is already happening. It's happening right now. It'll continue. It can't possibly stop, because the situation that's giving rise to all the problems in Europe and the UK and even in the US, where we've got border problems, are all being caused by global climate change. And you can have other theories as to why that is, but that's why it is. People are fleeing fighting, and they're fleeing food crises, and they're running away from economic collapse. And they're not trying to come to this country to eat our dogs and cats. They're trying to escape from terrible situations in their own countries. And these people are not poor people. How do you think somebody crosses from Africa into Mexico to try and cross the border into the US? Who do you think those people are? They're not poor people. They're not poor people. Oh, they're not rich people either. Rich people would simply buy a visa, bribe somebody, and end up in the US and start a business. They'd be fine. But they're not poor people either. They're doctors and nurses and teachers, college professors, these people with money who just have to get out. I'm not saying, well, that makes it okay then. I'm just saying that these are not poor people who never had a chance. The poor people are dying in place. The poor people are being massacred. The poor people are starving to death. The poor people are never going to be a problem for the US or the UK. The poor people were never a problem. These are wealthy people. And they're getting on airplanes, and they're buying tickets, and they're getting on cruise ships, and they're buying tickets, and they're coming to Mexico, and they're coming with cash, and they're moving north, and they're getting to the border, and they're crossing into the US, and they've got money, and they just want to start over. So there's no way to stop this, and most of it is being caused by climate change and the stress that these countries are being placed under. Now, right here in the US, we just took a massive hit from Hurricane Helene, which was generated in the Gulf of Mexico. Very unusual. Came ashore as a Category 4 hurricane, also very unusual, but the combination of those two is double unusual. And then it proceeded to go across the country, destroying as it went. A 500-mile long path of destruction, which is triply unusual. It was a Category 2 hurricane in Georgia, which is hundreds of miles inland. Hundreds of miles inland. People were like, what just happened? Yeah, you just got a Category 2 hurricane from the Gulf, and not from the Atlantic, from the Gulf, that passed through Florida into Georgia, crossed Georgia as a Category 2 hurricane, and destroyed you. What was that about? That's global heating. So it's happening right here in the US. Those people are finished. Those people are done. I could do a video on how done they are, but they're done. Those people are done. Look at these people. I mean, who's gonna save these people from this? Who's gonna come in here and look at this road? That road needs to be fixed before the people on the wrong side of that blockage can get out. unless they're going to carry them out with Army helicopters. That road has to be completely fixed, and 100 miles more of that road has to be completely fixed before construction equipment can come in, dragging trailers full of lumber and plywood and of course appliances and everything else that you're going to need to rebuild. That road and every bridge associated with it and the hundreds of miles of these roads are going to have to be fixed before anything can even get started. And you're talking about months worth of work, if not years. Bridges take 6 months to a year to build. Hell, bridges take 6 months just to design and get funding for. And even if the federal government opens up the public trust and starts throwing money at these places, it's going to be 6 months to a year before any of this stuff can be fixed in a significant way. 6 months to a year. And what are these people going to do? They're going to leave, and they become refugees. And what happens when a bunch of North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgian refugees just start showing up in cities that aren't familiar with these people and what they need culturally? Are they going to bring their guns? Are they going to bring their MAGA? Are they going to bring their Second Amendment concerns and inundate these communities? I mean, the Europeans had to deal with dirty refugees coming from Syria and Africa. Well, the U.S. has its own set of problems culturally, right? What happens when all these people start showing up in progressive, woke, as they like to call it, cities, demanding services, demanding to be made whole, demanding all these things? They're just going to come with their demands because they're broken. They're completely broken. These people they're completely broken. Probably most of them forever. Broken, most of them broken forever. Just like the Syrians were broken, just like the Central Africans are now broken. They're broken forever. They'll never have anything to go back to. They're done. They're finished. Now, this is a refugee crisis within the United States of America, but we have a big enough country and we have enough regional diversity that we might as well be 8 or 10 nations. And although you're free to cross the border from one state to another, and we have a transfer union and the money flows where it needs to go, and we all use the same currency, we all speak the same language, even with all that going on, it might as well be 10 different countries. And these people are going to bring all their familiar culture and all of their familiar politics, and they're going to go to these woke cities, and they're probably not going to be welcome. I mean, they'll be welcome to some extent until they, start raising hell and demanding their Second Amendment and more school shootings and all this other crap. And people aren't going to put up with it. And so we're going to have a problem right here in the US of A with our own internal refugees, because these people are wiped out. They're done. These people are done. They don't even know they're done. All these people are done. Everything here is finished. They're not going back. They can't even get out. And when they get out, they're not going to be able to get back in, because they're going to get out on helicopters. And how are they going to get back? On a helicopter? Of course not. Of course not. FEMA will finally show up, because it takes them weeks to show up to anything. And they'll put all these people in an auditorium somewhere on a high school campus, and they'll say, okay, here's how it is. Here's what we can do for you. And we've got a month to do it. And pretty soon we're going to have to be someplace else facing another set of catastrophes. And well, here's what we can do for you for the next couple of weeks. We're going to put you up in hotels. We're going to give you temporary housing vouchers that are good for 6 months. And then after that, you need to wire your shit up tight, because we're not going to be here for you. Find family members who can take you in. Find communities where you maybe have a second home and you can start over. Get your money out of the bank. Take out a loan, whatever. You're not selling your house. If all your money was wrapped up in your house, then you're finished. But if you have 2 houses and one of them's in New Jersey, go there. That's all they're going to tell them. We can't fix you. We can't make you whole. We're not going to rebuild your house. Even if you got insurance, which most of them don't, right? Most of these people are swimming naked. Then even if you got insurance companies can't rebuild your house, because the roads and the bridges are down. They're going to stay down for a year. Now, the demagogues at the state level and the federal level, right? Presidents, governors, will come boiling out of the woodwork, and they'll promise these people anything they want to hear. Anything they want to hear. We're going to make you whole. We're going to get all the money in the United States of America to come for you and make you whole. We're going to rebuild. You're going to be stronger than you were before. we're America, and you're Americans, and you're red-blooded Americans, flag-waving Americans, and we're going to make this country great. And if we have to take money away from the education system or the welfare system or the whatever system and give it to the red-blooded Americans, then we're going to do that. That's demagoguery, because they can't do that. Congress can do some of those things, but Congress isn't necessarily on board. Even the parts of it that are the MAGA wing aren't necessarily on board with that kind of an agenda. So they'll get elected anyway. And then pretty soon, they're wanting to be president, or they're president already. And now they're wanting to be emperor, or now they're wanting to be king, and whatever. It just keeps going. Demagogues never shut up. They just never shut up. Until you hang them from a lamp pole, like they did Mussolini. They just never shut up. They just keep going. They keep pushing and keep blaming someone, keep finding weaker opponents to demonize. And they'll promise these people the moon. They'll promise these people the moon. Oh, and then they'll promise them cheap gasoline on top of everything else. And we'll be a world-class country again. And the Europeans will stop laughing at us. They're going to promise these people whatever they want to hear. That's demagoguery. They can't deliver, but they don't need to deliver. They just need to get into power. And once they're in power, they do what they want to do. And what all demagogues want is power, absolute power. And they want it forever. And that's how you get World War III. Demagogues wanting power for all time. And when they start bumping into each other and elbowing each other, pretty soon you got a world war. It's always been that way. And if you're not familiar with history, then you won't understand anything what I just said. But that's how it is. It's always been that way. People get in trouble and they start demanding help, and real people who write real policy can't help them, because it's going to take a year to fix those bridges and those roads into Appalachia. It's going to take years. Maybe it's even impossible to fix the drought problems in Syria and in Central Africa. And maybe it's impossible to get the radical Muslims out of Central Africa, demonizing the opposition and killing people, entire villages. Maybe it's impossible to solve these problems. If that's the case, then these problems continue forever. And they just get worse and worse and worse. And the same thing with this kind of hurricane bullshit. These hurricanes will never go away. They just get worse. There's more forming in the South Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico right now. They're all going to come ashore eventually. Something will come ashore. Some hypercane, possibly some Category 6 monster will come ashore. And it just keeps going. It just keeps going. Some of these people fled to, the Carolinas to get out of New York after Hurricane Superstorm Sandy. They were wiped out there, so they left and they went to someplace that was cheaper to live. And they got established in Carolinas and Tennessee and Kentucky just in time for this bullshit to come along. Wiped them out a second time. This can't be fixed, and the demagogues can't fix it. But the demagogues can cause World War III. So that's why you don't escape World War III. Even if the flare-up in the Middle East is somehow managed or fails to expand, which is another way of managing, I guess, meaning they can kill each other, but no one else is going to get involved. Even if it's managed and so it doesn't expand, global climate change is global, period. Global climate change affects everybody eventually. And even if your nation manages to escape global climate change and global heating, the nation next door might not. And then they're coming across your border if they can. If they have to and if they can. They're coming across your border. And what are you going to do about that? Are you going to wage war? Maybe you do. What if that other nation doesn't like you waging war against their people who are trying to cross the border just to get food and water, shelter? And now you have a war on your hands. And maybe it's easy for the U.S. to win those kinds of wars, but maybe it's not so easy for Europe to win. And Europe is part of NATO. And what happens if Europe is suddenly inundated with refugees coming from Russia and Belarus and Ukraine and Africa and the Middle East and Asia, right? These are all contiguous land masses. People could just walk. They don't need a boat. They don't need a plane. They can just walk. Get on a bicycle. Have a push cart with all your junk in it, including your kids. Just walk. What happens if Europe finds itself fending off a massive refugee crisis? And what if that causes a war in Europe? A big one. The U.S. is part of NATO. The U.S. is supposed to come to their aid militarily if there's a regional war. I guess it doesn't mean the U.S. will. Of course, depends on who's sitting in the White House. And what our situation is, I suppose, what if our situation is very similar? Then, maybe we have a third world war, maybe we don't. But the point is, we're all going to be in the same boat at that point. because of global heating. And sure, maybe the Iranian war will cause World War III. Might not. That's kind of our decision. But global heating is not our decision. Global heating is a thing. Global heating is the planet. And the planet, it could cause World War III by itself. Now, I'm trying to convince you that your concerns about global stability, while there's a flare-up in the Middle East, that's an obvious thing to be concerned about. In reality, your biggest problem is global heating. Because while the Middle East may or may not give you World War III or large-scale regional crises, global heating absolutely will. And global heating is here. It can only get worse, and it almost certainly will. I don't see any... I'm a scientist. I understand this topic. I understand this theory. I understand the physics behind it. I understand the economics behind it. And I don't see any discussion of any kind. Not a sentence about how we're going to avoid global heating. One, we can't. It's already here. But two, could we avoid making it worse? And the answer to that one is also no. We cannot avoid making it worse. And at some point, and it doesn't have to be 100 years from now, it doesn't have to be 10 years from now. At some point, we're already having enough regional crises due to global heating, like for example Brexit, like for example Trumpism, like for example the rise of right-wing parties in Europe and around the world. We're having enough problems from global heating that, wow, all of a sudden, we're just going to be inundated with people who want to fight about it. Kinetic war. So what are you supposed to do about all that? What can you do about all that? I don't know. It's hard to say. I think my message that I have long established on this channel remains unchanged. It's a couple of things that you need to anticipate. Nobody anticipated Brexit, but Brexit happened. Nobody anticipated the rise of MAGA, Trumpism, but it happened. So there's a lot of other things that you're not thinking about that you're going to have to start thinking about. You're going to have to start thinking about regional fracture. So large countries breaking into smaller countries. Russia, the Russian Federation, it's a federation even more loosely organized than the United States. United States is a federation. We even have a federal government, right? But it's a loose federation of somewhat independent states that agree to certain terms of cooperation, like a transfer union, like open borders, like whatever. But as I mentioned in the beginning, the United States is really about 8, maybe 10 countries. They're fairly easy to identify. And their willingness to cooperate depends on a certain amount of internal stability. And once stability breaks down, then that's going to break down too. And once it does, then your idea, your current notion that you live in a United States of America will simply no longer hold. You'll be in some kind of quasi-independent federation of states, like maybe for my situation, I live in California. So we might be a federation of states like Washington State, Oregon, California, maybe Nevada, maybe Arizona, possibly. Some of that would have to do with water. Some of it would have to do with just a cultural affinity. And some of it would have to do with defense. Nevada, if it was part of our federation that resulted from the breakup of the U.S., if Nevada was part of our federation, it's an easily defended space. And you have to start worrying about defending your borders. We may not want people coming from the Midwest into Cascadia, as it is sometimes called. We may not want them because whatever, they're angry, they're violent, they're right-wing, they're Nazis, they're whatever, the fascists, right? Could be that all those Germans who moved to the Midwest and started farms, at the beginning of the last century, maybe they all rediscover fascism, and bad news, right? So So Nevada might be defensible, and so on. So there's all these decisions that are going to be made probably at the drop of a hat, and you're not ready for that. A lot of your food comes from the Midwest, right? And the upper Midwest and even the Southeast. So where's your food going to come from? Well, California is fairly sufficient for food, as is Oregon and Washington State. We have a lot of arable land and a very sustainable climate for sustaining agriculture. So we might be doing really well. As we see in the Southeast right now, from the images you're seeing here, there's not going to be any agriculture going on in these places. They're not planting. They're not planting their winter crops. They're not getting ready to harvest. What crops they had have been completely destroyed. And, they're going to have to rebuild their farms, rebuild their equipment, buy all new equipment, secure their water supply. And before they can do any of that, they have to completely rebuild their homes, right? They have to recreate their lives. But how can they do that without a job, right? These communities are completely destroyed, and their means of making any money to sustain themselves is completely destroyed. So they don't even know where to start. They have no place to begin. And so who's going to manage the fields? Who's going to bring in the harvest? Who's going to distribute the crops? I don't know how this is going to happen. Now, this is Appalachia. They don't export a lot of food, but parts of Georgia were impacted. Parts of Florida Panhandle were impacted by the same thing. And the disaster tends to spread outwards. Pretty soon, communities that weren't strictly involved in the actual path of the carnage, they end up being impacted by the refugees. Maybe all their money gets poured into refugee crisis, and they can't manage the farms anymore. I don't know. It seems a bit far-fetched, but it's possible. That's what happened in Syria. So maybe it happens here too. Or not. We don't have bottomless opportunities for, correcting these problems. At some point, the U.S. just becomes internally overwhelmed. So you have to get ready for the prospect that you may have food supply interruptions, and those could be coming any week now. Really, by summer. I should think that if there's going to be a problem, we're going to know about it. And of course, what else happens? There might be energy interruptions. There may be that some of these areas are producing oil and natural gas that used to go into the market. Now they're not. Could be that they require so many resources, like including plywood, for example, and lumber, that the price of plywood and lumber and fuel goes up significantly. You don't have to be in these areas to be impacted by this. Now, if the federal government comes along and subsidizes the oil companies so that they don't raise the price, well, that's giving away money to the oil companies. That's not going to be politically popular. So let the market figure out what the price is. And what if the price of crude oil products in California, diesel, jet fuel, gasoline, what if the price doubles? Or even goes up 50%? Even 50%, 10% increase in gasoline is generally makes the evening news, especially if it happens over a short period of time. What if it was a 50% increase over a short period of time? What would people think about that? Would they be protesting at the service stations and dragging the people out of the service station and beating them up in the parking lot? They might. Americans are like that. Americans take the law into their own hand, and it's whatever they decide the law is, right? They don't go to a judge and see what's allowed. They just make up laws as they go. That's how Americans are. So yeah, here you are. You have this big disaster. Pretty soon, you might have people taking the law into their own hand. Price of gas is too much. Price of lumber is too much. And the insurance company hasn't made the payout, and I haven't got my money. And who's supposed to fix these bridges? Who's supposed to fix these roads? And people get violent. They're not happy with the progress. They don't see how they're being helped. So, yeah, violence. Well, violence doesn't solve your problems, but in America we have more guns than we have people, and there's a reason for that. And you think the people are just going to think about their guns and not think about using them when they've been destroyed by a hurricane, and they don't see FEMA showing up the next day handing out ponies for all the children? They got AR-15s. They know where to go. They know who to target. Fix it. Make it so. And then, of course, they elect demagogues who will make it so, or they claim to. But they won't make it so. All they'll do is sow division. So you'll have to get used to this. Even if you live in California, even if you live in my neighborhood, you're going to have to get used to this. too many more disasters like this, and America is basically fucked. Because we won't be able to cope internally. And of course, there's other disasters happening every single day elsewhere in the world, and we're not going to be able to cope with those either. We have people coming across our borders now who aren't Mexicans looking for work. They're Ugandans looking to start over. They're people from Chad and Ethiopia. They got money. They're looking to start over in a rich nation that has a rule of law, and they're coming through at the Mexican border because they can't get a visa any other way. They can't get across any other way, and they're hoping to start over. The Americans aren't going to escape that. The Europeans got it first, but the Americans aren't going to escape that. It's just impossible. It's impossible. These are people with money. If they can figure it out, they'll buy their own yacht and they'll sail it into Florida and set up shop. They'll just do whatever they want to do. They've got money. You can't stop them. Of course, if you're governor of Florida, you'll probably welcome them with open arms. But will the people of Florida welcome them with open arms? They're accusing the people in Ohio of eating cats and dogs. That's demagoguery, of course. It's not happening, but that's demagoguery, and that's how you get elected president of the United States in the U.S. You accuse other people, immigrants, even immigrants with money, even rich people who just happen to be immigrants, right? You accuse them of eating people's pets. That's how you get to be president of the United States. That's what you do. That's America. That's how America runs. That's how America is. America is that way. America is that way. Don't say America's better than that. America ain't better than that. That's how America is. Demagoguery. Just find some group of people who looks different, acts different, talks different, and accuse them of eating people's pets. You can't prove they don't. And that's what people want to hear. Demagoguery. Well, we're going to get the same thing in the Southeast. All this destruction, all of this bullshit, all this flooding, all of this, it's all going to have to be fixed tomorrow. And if it isn't, then the demagogues are going to come in and say, I could fix this. Elect me president, elect me governor. I'll fix this in a heartbeat. They can't. But that's what they'll say. And the average American will say, okay, because they think it's all a conspiracy anyway. They think all the problems that aren't being fixed are some kind of a conspiracy. They're saying it. They're saying it right now. I was sitting in a chat room during some press conference in, I don't know, it was Asheville, I think it was. And, it was, I don't know, it was the governor or the mayor or somebody was in the place and having a press conference, and I was in it was a live press conference, and I was listening to the live, but I was mostly there to see what was going on in the chat. And the live chat, there was hundreds of people in there, and they were talking about what the person was saying, but they were also talking sometimes about their situation. Yeah, I've been driven out of my community. I don't know when I'm going to go back. My house is half destroyed. The bridges are all down, and people were saying, and we're really scared. We're listening to this press conference, and other people, and it could have been Russian trolls, who knows who they were saying, yeah, and the federal government, the FEMA's not going to come for you. The FEMA will come for the Haitians who eat people's pets, but they're not going to come for you. The federal government will come for the black people in New Orleans, but they're not going to come for you because you're white. And that's what they say in these chat rooms. And people in the chat rooms were responding like, how can you say such hateful things? This is terrible. You're just driving people insane with verbiage like that. Stop talking like that. This is America. We're better than this. And my response is, no, you're not. You're not better than that. That's at least a third of the population of America talks like that, thinks like that. Maybe closer to half. No, you're not better than that. That's exactly who you are. That chat room was a cross-section of America. And the cross-section I identified with were simply bewildered. They were bewildered. How can you say things like that? That's so hateful. That is so disruptive. That's so divisive. Could you just not talk like that? And of course they come right back and say, I'm right. And by the way, aliens, and reptilians. It's all QAnon, and it's MAGA, and it's people losing their fucking minds. And that's what happens when you have too many crises going on at once. When you have too many people that are too scared and can't figure it out, and they're not hearing what they want to hear, they lose their fucking minds. And enough people lose their fucking minds, you get demagogues. And you get enough fucking demagogues, you get World War III. And that's all because of global heating. All of it. All the way down. All the way down. Now maybe you live in one of these regions that's going to break away at some point. Some federation of states that can get their shit together and maybe has enough resources, has enough arable land, has a decent climate, doesn't get too hot, and maybe you'll be okay. But you're going to have to surrender to this idea that things are about to change. You're going to have to surrender to that. Are you ready to do that? Or are you going to be one of those people that loses their fucking mind with anxiety and existential dread that things are changing and, oh my God, I'm not ready for change. And promise me that things won't change. Promise me that you can make it all the way it was. Ozzie and Harriet, 1952. Make it all the way it was. Go back. Eisenhower administration, when everything was wonderful and we were winning all the wars and we had the bomb and nobody else did. Take me back. Okay? Make America great again, or whatever the current slogan is, right? And there'll be somebody who comes out of the crowd and says, yes, I can do that. You want to make America great again? Whatever that means. Well, it's whatever you want it to mean, but I can do that. All you people tell me what makes America great again, and we'll do that. I guarantee it. That's demagoguery, because you can't guarantee that. And if you live in a place that's awash with demagoguery right now, my advice is get out. Just get out. You got to get out. And don't go to Florida, and don't go to the Carolinas, and don't go to Georgia, and don't go to any Gulf state, because those people are getting out too. I don't know where you're going to go. I don't know where you're going to go. But if you're surrounded by demagoguery and people who are just conspiratorial and have lost their minds, okay, then get out. You just have to get out at this point. That's my only advice. And what you're looking for is you're looking for community. People with a like mind, people who are solution oriented, who are willing to pull together, work together, bury the hatchet, set aside their differences, and focus on survival. Because global heating is going to force you to focus on survival. And probably the people you can find to work with are going to be wealthy people, because that's how this shit works. The people who are not wealthy, they can't make the move. They can't make the transition. The people who are not wealthy, don't have money, don't have land, don't have whatever, they die in place. That's what's happening in Africa. That's what's going to happen in the Middle East. People are going to die in place. They won't be able to get out. They can't get out. They have nowhere to go. No one will take them, and they have no way to get there. Most of the people will die in place. But the people with money will make a move. So you may end up in a community with people who have resources and are trying to find another way of life. And because they have resources, they have hope. And because they have hope, they're willing to work with other people. And so you need to find these communities. And if you're not one of those people that you can't get into that community, then you may be fucked. It's a possibility. You could be like those Syrian refugees who did not get out of Damascus. You could be like those Chadian refugees who did not get out of their village. You need to start thinking about this. You need some lead time. You need to find out where you need to be and with whom you need to be with to survive the coming collapse of civilization. Because it is imminent. The collapse of civilization is imminent. And maybe World War III will precipitate the collapse. But even if that doesn't happen, the collapse of civilization is imminent. A few years, 5, 10 at most. There's no way this dumpster fire doesn't flare up and devour everything. There's no way this doesn't happen. Everything we have going on wrong right now continues to go wrong. Things that you thought could not go wrong will, like Hurricane Helene coming ashore, hitting Georgia as a Category 2 hurricane out of nowhere. Things that you thought were impossible, like the utter destruction of Appalachia in western North Carolina and Tennessee and Kentucky, and parts of Georgia. Everything you thought was impossible is going to happen, and things that you didn't even think were possible, things you didn't even think would be a problem, like the breakup of the country, the United States of America, into loose-knit federated states. That's entirely possible. I would even say likely at some point. It doesn't mean that Donald Trump is going to be the one that triggers that, but some other Trump that comes after him, one of his kids, right? Or somebody, J.D. Vance, floats to the top of the cesspool and, gets his demagogue on and gets elected to power. One of these people is just going to fuck it all up. Looking for power and immortality and going to live forever and AI and upload my brain to a satellite. And these people, they're insane. They're completely insane. Mussolini was insane. Hitler was completely insane. They're clever, but they're nuts. Stalin was completely unhinged. Mao Zedong, he killed millions of his own people. These people are unhinged. They're clever. And in another way, they're stupid. But they're clever. And there's no way to stop them. Because when they promise to make you whole and give you the Eisenhower administration, and it's all going to be white people at the voting booth, then a lot of people say, yeah, it sounds good to me. And they're also stupid. Because that's not what you want. You don't want whiteness everywhere. You don't even want money everywhere. You want peace and security everywhere. That's what you want. And you get that by working with people and cooperating and creating a life together. Because the people that you're living with and that you are dependent on and who are also dependent on you, you don't fight with. Well, if you want to fight with them, go ahead. But you get thrown outside of the village. You get thrown over the wall. They're not going to put up with your shit. You come in here. You're part of our village. You're part of our community. You cooperate. Yeah, and that means sometimes you do as you're told. That means sometimes when we all have to pull together, we pull together. And if you're not pulling together, you're outside the gate. We don't need shit like that. We don't need your MAGA bullshit. Work with us or get out. That'll be your choice. And are you ready for that? Are you ready for that? Are you ready to have to cooperate with people that you barely know? Well, you'll eventually get to know them. And you'll really come to depend on each other. And you'll be best of friends, naming your children after these people. Right? That's what's certainly going to happen. But are you ready to do that now? Because that day is coming. You're going to have to find your community. You're going to have to go somewhere else. You're going to have to work with people. You're going to have to trust them. Are you ready for that? You haven't had to do that so far. You're not doing that today. That's your future. Are you ready to do that? And are the other people around you ready to do that? Because if they're not, it doesn't matter if you are. You have it all figured out and be ready to roll. And if the people around you are all paranoid schizophrenics, well then, too bad for you. You needed to be someplace else. You need to be at the right place with the right people when it dawns on you that this is over. That this way of life, this civilization, this way we organized ourselves, these national borders, these ethnicities, these religions, these ways of governance, these economic systems, when they're over, where are you going to be when that finally lands? Because after that, you're not going anywhere. After all that goes down, you're not going anywhere. And it doesn't matter whether World War III erupts in the Middle East or if it just happens slowly over the next 10 years because of global heating. You need to be where you need to be when the axe falls. Because after that, nobody's going anywhere. No one's pulling together with anybody unless it's through absolute, lethal requirements that you're just not going to survive if you don't. So you're going to be hearing a lot about World War III. All I really wanted to say was that you're getting World War III or something similar to it, regardless. And I'm going to end on this note. Well, first of all, don't forget to like and subscribe. I come back pretty regularly these days. There's so much going on in the world. But what I want to finish on is that, you have an individual responsibility to survive. And whether it's World War III from the Middle East or World War III from something else, or it's just a general collapse, okay? It doesn't need to be called something to be the end of the world. It doesn't have to be biblical to be the end of the world. This world, as we know it, is basically finished because it's dependent on fossil fuels. And we can't do that anymore. And if the Israelis, bomb the oil facilities in Iran, and the Iranians in retaliation bomb the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, and all of that can happen, I don't know, this afternoon, right? Then you're going to find out that your dependency on fossil fuels, which is a real thing, I'm dependent on it, and I know you are too, that's going to become a big deal. A big deal. And trust me, the demagogues are going to come out from under their rocks they've been sleeping under. And they're going to tell you, I can fix that for you. You don't like the price of gas? I can fix that for you. You don't like being at the lines at the service station? I can fix that for you. You don't like it when they put the bags over the pumping stations and say we're out of gas. I could fix that for you. They can't, but they're going to say it. And how are you going to respond? Because that's a decision you need to make right now. You need to make that in advance of the crisis and them coming along and saying, oh, I can fix this. So that's it for me. I got things to do, and so do you. You got work to do. Sparky. I might come back and talk about this Hurricane Helene thing again. There's a lot to say here. I've said some of it in a prior video, but man, the more we learn about what happened, the more there is to say. I could say a lot about this. I guess preview of coming attraction. These people are done. These people are finished. And I guess I need to explain what that means. Like, subscribe, come back again. We do this periodically. Get ready.